welcome everyone to alt.net August. So we have Francis and Lee here with us in the studio. Francis is in Gangnam in Korea in a makeup studio, as you usually do to come into alt.net. Next month, actually, I think I'll be in Korea, so we'll swap places. And Lee, where are you physically, by the way?
In my living room in Newtown in Sydney.
There you go. Well, this is Sydney alt.net, and I'm in Sydney too. So at least we have 2 out of 3 in Sydney to support the name. So today we have the usual JetBrains giveaway of 2 licenses. Let's see if anyone's here. Can anyone say hello in the comments and just make sure we've got people listening before we launch into things too much? We've got Francis, which is a good start.
I think we're a little bit too early.
Maybe we're too early. We're too keen.
Yeah.
We have in the past.
Normally we don't start this early. To be fair,
sometimes we do delay the start a little bit for either technical reasons or other reasons that we just didn't quite get there in time and get everything ready. But let's see. Here we go. We're starting to get a few people coming through.
Yeah.
It's good. So, all right, that's good. So I think about 25 or 30 people RSVP'd. So there should be people coming to watch. All right. So with the JetBrain licenses, so it's as usual. I'll collect I'll write 2 questions up during the course of the session based on Lee's talk, and then I'll ask them at the end. And whoever gets them first, or gets each question first, will get their very own JetBrains license to any of the JetBrains products. So yes, stay to the end for this. All right, we've got a few more people. Maybe we'll start at 7:05, so in 2 minutes' time. Good. So Francis has seen Lee's talk before and says it is really awesome. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And I've seen a little preview of the talk, and yeah, it's amazing. Yes. Lee was saying that his partner is a graphics designer and worked on it, and it suddenly looks very professional and very cool. Far better than my slides drawn together. Do you want to say any more, Lee, about it?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, you're quite right. Yeah, my partner will get most of the credit for this talk. At least it will look good. I'm going to do my best to make it sound good, but she did a cracking job of illustrating what otherwise could be a little bit of a dry subject. So hopefully people enjoy the looking at it, and we have a bit of fun with that as much as anything else.
It looks like it'll be a lot of fun. So we've got a few more people here. So we've got questions about the JetBrains products at work. And okay, 1 more minute, and then we'll get rolling into the action. Unless you got any news or anything you want to add, Francis?
Not really, but any news? Yeah, I just wanted to actually just give you guys an intro. So I think I saw Lee's talk at the other meetup group that I helped running, and it was still to this day like one of the best talks I've ever seen. And yeah, I'm very happy that Lee's actually is kind enough to actually redo his talk on alt.net as well. So hopefully you guys will have a blast.
You're setting expectations too high now, Francis. It was a decent talk that you thought was all right. You know, we've got to build some, set a bar reasonable for me here. You know?
Hang on. Hey, you've milked this talk like more than anyone I've seen the Milka talk. I mean, what is it? You've given it that NDC, and you can
Yeah.
it starts at a list of conferences.
I mean, that's the top one so far. But also very happy to be doing it with you guys.
Yeah, and we're definitely humbled and honored, definitely.
All right, we've got about 7:05 now, so maybe we'll go into it. Just in questions. I know we usually do them during, but in this case, Lee says it's more of a story, so save the questions to the end, and you can put them in the chat if you want to ask as you go. But Lee will answer them afterwards, so that the flow is maintained throughout the talk. So without further ado, I might bring on Lee's presentation. Here we go. And put Lee at the top where he should be. Here we go. And yeah, I think when you're ready, Lee, take it away.
Yeah, lovely. Will do. So feel free to interrupt me if there's any technical issues. Obviously, don't let me talk to myself. But otherwise, yeah, I'd love to take questions at the end if there are any. So where to start? Well, yeah, we've had a little introduction there, but yes, my name is Lee Dunkley. I've been working with software for like over 15 years now, which definitely is showing. Most of that time, I've actually been a front-end person, spend most of my time in TypeScript and React. So you might be wondering, why the hell am I here talking to you about domain-driven design of all things? Well, a lot of the time, what we deal with in the front end are the less than great decisions of the back end. So that drew me into really interested into the modeling of systems. And that's what brought me to domain-driven design. So not ready to claim that I'm an expert or anything like that, but with lots of reading, trial and error, and conference talks like this, I've learned that domain-driven design has a great many benefits. And one of them is that it can help prevent Emu Wars. Now, for some reason, this quality hasn't been explicitly called out in the original Eric Evans DDD book, nor any of the spin-off books or anything like that. So I feel this is a terrible, glaring omission, and that's why I'm here to try and fill that gap. So how we're going to do that? We'll go through things in about 4 parts. We'll start off with a short history lesson, which sort of serves as a kind of silly code analogy. After that, we'll take the problems from that silly analogy, make it a little bit more real-worldy. Then part 3, we'll see how domain-driven design can come in and help us fix some of the problems we were facing before. And part 4 is just a little wrap-up and quick summary at the end. So you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not obviously from Sydney or originally from Australia. I came over from the UK probably nearly 6 years ago. And before that, I only knew the sort of classic dangerous Australian animals. I'd been warned about the snakes. Obviously, I knew about the spiders. All the Australians in London were constantly warning me about the drop bears, so I knew about them. But I did not know, I must admit, I did not know Australia had emus. I also did not know that they were dangerous, and I had certainly never, ever heard of a country going to war with an animal before. So if, like me back then, you don't know much about the Emu Wars, what we're going to do at the very start here is just a quick little recap about it. So it was just after World War I, and new farmers in Western Australia were losing most of their crops to the emus. And to combat that, the army was brought in to help, along with their cutting-edge Lewis light machine guns, which my artist promised me definitely looked like this. Although I think she's wrong, because otherwise I had one when I was about 10 years old, so that can't be right. And anyway, the army were brought along, and they were given this goal: kill all the pesky emus. So with a bunch of soldiers and a bunch of machine guns, Australia went to war with the emu. So I'd said I wouldn't take questions, but here's one exception. Any history experts in the chat know who won the war between Australia and the emus? Any history buffs out there? Well, it was in fact the emus. Yeah, you got it. the Kiwis didn't take part. If they did, maybe it would have changed. But no, the emus had the Australians beat in this one. So, yeah, there were just too many of them. They were too fast. They were also too agile. Apologies there, that's the wrong slide. I mean, they were too agile as in they could run and jump and were nimble and could evade bullets pretty easily. So because of that, Australia had to make do with being the runners-up in this particular war. But to be fair to Australia, you didn't just lose because of the emu's strengths. Physical constraints also played a very important role in this conflict. So simply Australia did not have enough soldiers, and well, it didn't really have enough machine guns either. And in software, we don't typically suffer from these kind of physical constraints. So our weapon of choice is code. And we can always write more code, can't we? With things like AI and Copilot now, I mean, we've got so little constraint. It's not really much of an exaggeration to say that we have got near infinite code at our fingertips. And no other industry has this quality. You know, for us, this is kind of our superpower, if you will. So what if we could go back in time and bestow this lack of constraints on those Western Australians? So now they have near infinite soldiers and they have near infinite machine guns. Who's going to win the war this time round? Well, I mean, obviously it's the humans, you know. With those constraints gone, it simply does not matter how fast or how agile the emu are, they're going to lose. In this alternate reality, you know, the farmers now get to keep their crops, and the bin chicken finally gets to take its rightful place on the Australian coat of arms, which is definitely how it should have been from the start, in my opinion. So, by translating over this superpower of coding, we've completely rewritten history. But let's play with this a little bit more. So instead of giving the Western Australians of early 1900s our superpower, let's give us, you know, the coders of today, their problem. So you come into work tomorrow and the boss says to you, our biggest client has a problem with too many emus. And so we get presented with the goal, kill all the pesky emus. And of course you say to the boss, yeah, sounds weird, but you know, you're paying my bills, so sure, no problem. I guess I'll get coding. And I'm going to guess most people are here are, you know, pretty, you know, object orientated, or at least used to it. So we're going to say that our classes are equivalent to soldiers here, and that machine guns are equivalent to public methods on those classes. Just to save me from writing real code. Right. So come along and we've got this problem. We've got to kill the pesky emus. So we write a class, we add a method, and we'll manually test it, won't we? So we'll have a whole bunch of emus going in. Is it a gaggle of emus? I've no idea what the group term is. I should look that up. But a whole lot of emus going into our application. And oh dear, look, we're barely making a dent. I think I can just see we picked off 2 of them. I think we're down 2 emus. But, you know, no problem. Just like with regular coding things, we just started. We didn't really expect it to work straight off the bat, did we? And you can remember that we have our superpower. We can just write more code, can't we? So obviously that's what we're going to do. You know, those original classes are now going to delegate down to another couple of classes, each with their own, you know, public methods, couple of their own. And we'll manually test it again, won't we? Bunch of emus in. And, well, yeah, it's better. I think maybe we've got 5 or 6 there. But you've got to remember that this is a kind of a big problem. That's why we can't crack it in one go. Although I would forgive you at this point if you're thinking, not only is this problem silly, this is trivial, even for this little pseudo code. You know, we could just stick all of the emus in a loop and be done with it. And I hope you guys enjoy that, because that's actually the closest thing to real code you'll see. To me, that's basically TypeScript with emojis. I can pass that. Now that loop would be a great idea, would be fantastic. But as I am barely getting started with this talk, we're going to have to avoid that because it completely ruins my silly hypothetical. So instead, we're going to change things up a little bit, and we're going to say that this group of emus is not equivalent to an array of emus. Instead, we're going to say that each emu represents a different and unique problem in this overall problem space. One of them might be hiding behind a rock. This guy's really far away, and somehow an emu's got hold of the sword of a medieval knight. I don't know how that happens. Doesn't really matter. The point is that these problems are truly complex and unique, and unfortunately, that wonderful little loot is not going to save us. But again, doesn't matter. What we're going to do, we're back here. We're going to exercise our superpower and chuck some more code at it, aren't we? So adding even more classes and, do a bit more manual testing after we've done that. A bunch of emus in, and hey, we're making progress. It looks like the majority are goners now, I think. Obviously the boss keeps looking at their calendar, seeing the days and sprints pass by, and they're not that happy with us for taking this long. But that's their fault for not knowing how developer estimates work, isn't it, really? And anyway, we can't worry about that. We can't stress about them stressing. There's code to be written. We've still got a job to do here, and you can see where this is going. We're going to throw some more code on there, more classes, more methods, and we'll manually test it, and we'll give it a good hard go. And crap, no, that's not good. I'm not sure how clear that is to you guys, but some of the emus that we thought we got back have come back to life, and some of them have been upgraded to T-Rexes, which again apparently happens in this kind of scenario. But it was already getting a complex code base. There were bound to be some bugs, weren't there? There's always a couple of bugs as you're working on these things. So we just have to investigate those. And yes, the boss is now really staring daggers at us, and we're feeling, a little bit uncomfortable again. But we'll pull through. Maybe we'll do a late shift. Maybe we'll do a little bit of work at the weekend, and we'll fix up that code with, more code, obviously. And eventually when we're done, we'll manually test it. And hooray, it works. They've all bitten the dust. It finally works. A breath of relief there. Now, obviously, neither the boss nor the client see all this code that we've written. They can't see where all our blood, sweat, and tears have gone, where all those sprints have gone. To them, the app is just a black box. So, normal engineer problem, we don't feel necessarily like we're accurately appreciated. They don't know where all that pain's gone. But, who cares? It finally works. Actually, no. The only thing is we've got to get it past code review, haven't we? Yeah. Okay. Well, we're professionals here. We've got to get it through code review. And our pseudo class diagram, our very, very, very pseudo class diagram here, has just been giving a zoomed out view of this code base, of this complexity. You've got to remember that quite a few sprints have passed at this point. So this PR that we're about to throw over the fence is pretty big. It's like 2,000 lines or so. Now, I do hope you all think 2,000 lines is long for a PR. Every time I say this number, I'm thinking there's going to be some people out there going, that sounds reasonable, or I've done worse, or I've read worse. If that is you, you do have my condolences. But for us, for this talk, that is far too big. So when we do finally find some unlucky reviewer to take a look for us, I'm sure we've all done this, turn to your favorite buddy in the engineering team and go, oh, it's a bit of a hairy PR, but would you mind looking at it for me? Well, that's who we've picked out. But obviously it's so big and it's so boring. They're only going to find, a few typos for us at best, a couple of emos probably. If we're lucky, they might find us an Elmo. But really, it's so big, so boring. They've got their own code that they would much rather be writing, that they're about to give up. And yeah, Francis, I think you've picked me to it. They're going to give up in the sense that they're going to say, looks good to me, the classic approval and give up statement. But before they do that, they realize that we don't have any tests. So we nearly got away with it, but yeah, no good. They've noticed. So again, we're professionals. We're well-meaning. We can't throw this out without tests. So somewhat begrudgingly, we'll start adding them. A test for each class, where every other class is fully mocked out, and every assertion just asserts that the methods all output whatever they currently output, because hopefully that's what a good test is. But anyway, who cares? With the test done, PR's out, we've done it. We've succeeded. So unlike in the real world, with our superpower of near infinite code, we've won our digital Emu War. The thing is, though, if we reflect, we could ask ourselves, at what cost have we won it? Because if you remember, our goal was, kill all those pesky emus, which we'd need to test at this outermost scope to prove that, really, wouldn't we? And we're kind of just testing at these lower scopes, which mock out everything else. So are we proving that we've killed all the pesky emus and will continue with future changes? Well, I mean, sort of, but yeah, not really. Also, this code base is extremely complicated. Nobody's going to look forward to working on that again. Our reviewer, they basically gave up trying to understand it. Like all of us, you get about 500 lines in and then the eyes glaze over, and that's all they could do for us. Sure, we understand it. We wrote the thing roughly, but, give that a few months. Yep, clearly been a rough few months for us. And if we think about the boss and the client, they're definitely going to think we took far too long on this one. We're dreading the day that they find more bugs, and God help us if they come asking for new features, or what if the problem space develops? Maybe a couple of the emus learn to ride a skateboard, or one of them invents the flamethrower. Coming back and refactoring this code base to combat those new problems is not going to be fun. It's not going to be easy. Hopefully there's a junior on the team, then we give it to them when that happens. So really, we've just crushed the problem under an avalanche of code, if we're honest. And what does it cost us? Well, I'm going to argue it's cost us maintainability and it's cost us extensibility. And at this point, you might be stood there thinking, wasn't this meant to be a domain-driven design talk? Because all we have actually done so far is ascertain that Emu Wars are in the real world, well, they're unwinnable. And in code, they're winnable, but they're unmaintainable and unextensible. And that would be a very valid criticism. So what we're going to do now is move a bit closer to the real world and add a more realistic domain to our problems. So what domain are we going to do? Well, not just any domain. Obviously, we're going to add the ubiquitous, pun intended, domain-driven design presentation domain of e-commerce. I mean, it had to be e-commerce, doesn't it? It's always e-commerce. So let's say that it's an already established e-commerce store and that there are various APIs for shoppers, say, to view products, to add them to their basket, and to pay and to check out. And over for the store manager, we have APIs where they can view customers, see incoming orders, and to set those orders as dispatched. And this all works fine. Every day money goes from here to here, and goods go from here to there. And basically, everyone's pretty happy. And just backing it up, just to fill out the story, let's imagine we have a whole bunch of microservices, shipping, customers, orders, payments, and products, because microservices are still cool. Yeah, well, hopefully. Anyway, they're just in the backdrop for this talk anyway. So anyhow, you come into work tomorrow and the boss turns to you and says, the store manager needs to be able to update orders. And you say to the boss, well, that sounds a lot more realistic than the last bit of work you gave me. No problem, I'll get coding. So again, you write a class, add a method. That method is probably wired up to your, web framework of choice, taking in some update order command from the API and somewhere in the body of that class, we're reading and writing to the database. And again, for the sake of this talk, we're going to take things like authentication, permissions, security, logging. We're going to take all of that for granted, which we definitely never do in the real world. And already we basically have our update order API coded up. It's basically done. And to prove that, we do a bit of manual testing, don't we? Old order in it goes, and out comes an order with a few amendments. Looks great. Not only that, we're going to add tests, nice and easy. The PR, in this case, really fairly small and simple, which is awesome. And because of that, it gets quickly approved because there's not much code to get lost in. It looks good. We'll deploy it, and the boss will be happy with us. Well, at least for a little while. Because unfortunately, like all successful live systems, this thing has users, and users often come back to our boss and tell us that they're unhappy because there are bugs. So okay, well, what bug have we got? Okay, some shoppers receive too many items. I mean, it's not great, but there's always at least one bug, isn't there? So okay, some shoppers receive too many items. We'll go look at the code. We're not really seeing anything obvious that would do that. Our maths look pretty good. We're not doing anything silly, adding, plus 22 on any items or anything like that ourselves. So it doesn't look like the problem's in the code. So obviously we go looking in the logs, don't we? And it's in the logs that we find a pattern. So the bug occurs when the order is updated to have fewer products, but that is happening after the order was already okayed for dispatch. So in the end, the customer receives the original amount of goods and not the updated, reduced amount of goods that they should have received. All right, well, I mean, it's not great. It's obviously not great. But, back to the code. We know what we're doing. We know our superpower is in tow. We're just going to add a few more classes to handle this issue, this edge case. So maybe this new class here is reaching out to the shipping service and to find out whether or not that order was already marked as ready for dispatch. And if it is, maybe over here we're encapsulating a sort of 400 you can't remove items after we've already marked the order as ready for shipping error. And I know that might sound like a lot for it to be a class, but all I'm looking to show here is that there are more responsibilities and behaviors going into our code, so they've got to go somewhere. So our code base is expanding. And anyhow, we do that. We do a bit of manual testing. We add some new unit tests to our new classes. And we get a pretty quick code review, again, because it's not that big. And again, with that done, we tell the boss it's fixed. We deploy it, and the boss is very happy with us. Well, at least for a little while, because, yeah, obviously they found a second bug, haven't they? Okay, that's not great. We're still a little embarrassed after the last one. What's this one? Okay, some shoppers are being undercharged. Okay, yeah. The store manager is particularly unhappy with that, liking money and everything. So, yeah, we better get on that one pretty quick. But luckily, obviously, we still remember that last bug. And, we know it's bound to be a horrible race condition again, isn't it? It's always a race condition. So back to the logs, and, we're right, aren't we clever? There are updates which add new products that occur after payment was already captured. Obviously, of course. Well, unfortunately, that means the shopper is charged the original lesser price and not the increased price that would have taken into account those new items. Okay, we don't feel good about that one, but it's all right. It is just another edge case. It's just another thing we've got to fix with a bit more code. So, again, we're going to exercise our little superpower here, and we're going to add some even more classes. And, this guy here might be reaching out to the payment service to see if payment was already captured. And if it was, and there's an update, we'll trigger some sort of 400, you can't add items after we've taken payment error. And those ones that were helping us with the shipping issue are now over here. And obviously, to work out which scenario we're in, we've got some more code that's sort of working out which edge case we're finding ourselves in and sort of tying those responses all together. And again, we'll do a bit of manual testing, which obviously takes a little bit longer because we've got to check we haven't broken the other edge case handling plus the happy path handling. So that's taking a bit longer. We've got all those scenarios to keep in mind. We'll have the unit tests. They again take a little bit longer as things are getting a bit more complex, and those guys in the middle are kind of just orchestrating things, which always reads a little funny in the tests. And that's kind of reflected in the code review, which has got larger, and that's taking a bit longer. But eventually, it all gets through. Eventually, we tell the boss that it's fixed, and we deploy it, and they're happy. Yeah, we all know these things come in threes. It's a classic trope. There's another bug. Okay, well, what's this bug? Some shoppers receive empty boxes. Empty boxes. Okay, that one is pretty special. And this time when we go to the logs, we don't see anything obvious there. Why on earth are empty boxes being sent out? We go to the code, and again, we don't seem to be emptying any collections. We don't seem to be destroying anything there. That doesn't seem to be, don't know how that is happening. And it isn't until we actually overhear the boss mention that it only seems to be happening with cancelled orders that a little light bulb goes off for us. Because if we think back to the APIs we've put forward for the store manager to use, there is no cancel order endpoint. That is not a thing. And it turns out the store manager has been using our brand new update order endpoint to gradually remove all of the items from a order as a way of cancelling the order. But they haven't cancelled the order. They've just made an order that it has no items. And our heavily automated warehouse honors that now empty order and ships those empty boxes on out of the factory. Now, again, at this point, I would very much forgive you for saying that is silly. That sounds contrived. That would never happen in the real world. But I can tell you that many, many years ago, for a company I may or may not have worked at, that this sort of problem can possibly sort of maybe definitely can happen. But anyway, back to our story. It's just another edge case. We'll be fine. Back to the code where we'll add even more code. And, this time, maybe this bit of code is going to remove the delivery information or invalidate it in some way if an order's last item has just been removed. And that will still cause, in the warehouse now, we'll have empty boxes with broken labels, but at least they're not going out the door. At least the problem's slightly less terrible. And seeing that this code base is getting pretty complicated now, we may well have reached for the designs pattern book. Maybe there's a few we haven't ticked off yet, and we'll find some nice things and do some very clever refactoring, really fight complexity with complexity here. Hopefully make things much better, but who knows? And again, at the end of that, we'll do a bit of manual testing. We'll add unit tests. We'll go through the code reviews, which is all now taking what feels like an absolute lifetime due to all of that mounting complexity of all those scenarios and all of that code we've written. But eventually we tell the boss it is fixed again. We deploy it again, and the boss is happy again. And time passes. And don't worry, I would not put you through that again. We're actually good now. With those 3 bugs taken care of, we're mostly good. Yes, there is still the occasional race condition where maybe an update happens at roughly the exact same time as, say, payment being taken. And yeah, that's still that thing in the warehouse with those empty boxes that the warehouse doesn't know what to do with, but at least they're not going out the door now. So sort of better. And these problems are all rare enough that most of the people are happy most of the time. So, we're not bad engineers. We've done okay. Now, going through this, you may have noticed that our pseudo class diagram here in this scenario looks very, very familiar. And I promise you that this is not only lazy illustration. I mean, that was a factor, but it's not just that. What this was a heavy-handed attempt at clever foreshadowing, which hopefully landed. Because what I'm saying here is just like our code-based Emu War, we've solved our update order problem with yet another avalanche of code, haven't we? And again, if we ask ourselves, at what cost have we solved the problem? Well, we're actually going to get a very similar answer. Our problem was, the store manager needs to update orders, which again, if we're honest, we'd have to test at this outermost scope to prove that. And in this scenario, that's even trickier, given all that IO of databases and given all the in-process calls to other microservices that maybe we should not be doing. So yeah, maybe we've got a few end-to-end happy paths, but mostly we're relying on like really mock-heavy tests again at these lower scopes that mock out everything else. So are we proving that update order works? Well, again, yeah, kind of, but yeah, maybe not really. I don't know about you guys, but I would struggle to use this bathroom with that lock. So yeah, it's not great. And yeah, this code base is again, extremely complicated. I mean, in our defense, actually, this time round with multiple reviews, our PRs got through, the reviewer managed, just about. But how about a new starter that comes to the team? They're going to have to try and take in all of this complexity all in one go. And how about ourselves in the future? Are we going to be confident if we're paged at 2 a.m. in a few months that we're going to remember how to navigate all of this? It's a bit iffy. Also, to the boss and the client, this will be remembered as a very slow project, one that was driven not by features that make them money and make them happy, but by bugs that hurt our reputation and lose us customers. So yeah, they're not happy with us at all. And again, it is a code base that nobody is looking forward to extending. So just like before, we have crushed the problem with an avalanche of code. And it's cost us maintainability and it's cost us extensibility. Now, often in these moments, us engineers, we tell ourselves little things like complex problems require complex solutions. Or we might say, you can't remove complexity, you can only move it around. And we say these things as a way of sort of absolving ourselves for the Frankenstein's monster that we've put in production, that we're sort of both proud of and afraid of at the same time. And for the vast majority of my career, I have been saying and deeply believing those things 100%. But this, everyone, is where domain-driven design finally comes into this talk and helps us question some of those assumptions. And in doing so, should hopefully help us make improvements to our code base. So where else to start when we're talking about domain-driven design, but with event storming? So what we're going to do here is we're going to add the classic e-commerce events that describe our system prior to that new requirement. So we're describing the system before we got the update order requirement coming in. So products will be listed, they'll be viewed, products will get added to a cart, delivery address and payment details will be added, payments will be authorized, orders will be submitted, we'll reserve stock, capture payment, confirm the order, send an email about the fact we've confirmed the order, and sometime later we will hopefully pick the stock and finally ship that order. So this is not to say that our system is necessarily event-driven in, say, a technical sense, but even if it is not, these events nonetheless happen. They just might be really implicit within our code. So now, with that done, let's replay our new problem statement. So the store manager needs to update orders, which in the past tense gives us a order updated event, doesn't it, to put on our timeline. And on the face of that, that sounds perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable. Past tense sounds like event, awesome. So where's it going on our timeline? Well, obviously it can't go on the timeline before the order was created, because that's when it first comes into existence. We need it to be submitted first. So it's going to have to be some time after that. So the order could be updated maybe just after it was submitted, or after stock was reserved, but before payment was taken. Although actually, yeah, it could happen also after that, and here, even up to it being shipped. And in fact, really, if we're honest, yeah, look at them go. Okay, what this is pointing out is this event can happen at the exact same time as some other very key events in our system. And if we think back to those bugs that we were fixing earlier, for example, when shoppers receive too many items, the fact that an order could be updated at any time was really the sort of underlying cause, or at least the trigger for all our problems. So clearly, there is a bit of a modeling smell here. And if you haven't seen one before, that's what a modeling smell looks like. So I'm going to say that that smell intensifies when we look at the language that we're using within our events. So if you're familiar with domain-driven design, you know that we put a lot of emphasis on ubiquitous language, on trying to use the same terminology as the business in the code, in an estimation everywhere. So if we start plotting our verbs on a scale from specific to hopelessly generic, we're going to have things like picked and added to cart. And these sound pretty good. They sound very e-commercey. We'll have reserved and listed. And sure, there are a few other domains they could pop up in, but they're still pretty specific. We're getting to added, viewed. Yeah, these are getting pretty generic now. But over here in hopelessly generic is updated, very much in the danger zone. Now, why do I hate updated so much? Well, that is because it is hard to think of a digital representation of anything that could not, at least in theory, get updated. So phones, they get updated. Games get updated. Even relationship statuses, well, unfortunately, now and then, they also get updated, don't they? So when you think about it, updated does not really signify much intent, if any at all. But that was our brief, that's what we were told to do. The store manager needs to update orders. Now, this is where I have to come clean and admit I left a few details out earlier when we were talking about the Emu Wars back at the start of this presentation. Because I presented that problem statement as kill all the pesky emus, which is kind of true, but it is not the whole story. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with the 5 whys technique. It is a powerful technique which we often overlook for how simple it sounds, that we're too clever, we don't need something that simple. But it is a wonderful, powerful technique that's going to help us with this kill all the pesky emus problem, and we'll even have a couple of whys to spare at the end. So if you remember, the goal was kill all the pesky emus. And that goal existed because the emus kept eating all of the new farmers' crops. So why? Why were they eating the new farmers' crops? It was doing that because the new farms, these brand new farms, were set up along long-standing emu migration routes. So the emus had been walking there for eons, and we stuck farms there, and then, wow, there's a problem. Who would have guessed, eh? But again, why? Why the need for these new farms, and why are we putting them there in these less than ideal locations? Well, this was because Australia had a bunch of returning soldiers who now needed employment. Soldiers were given these plots of land so they could make their living as farmers. So in reality, the goal was never truly kill all the pesky emus. That was merely an implementation detail of a possible solution to the real problem of how to provide these returning soldiers with employment. Now, as well as not being a domain-driven design expert, I am also not an expert in the early 1900s Australian job market. I must admit that did not come up in my education at all. But I think it's fair to say that there may have been other possible solutions to this problem. And I'm sure that none of these, alternatives would have been perfect, but I'm also very, very confident that none of them would have resulted in the need to start an unwinnable war against an army of 6-foot-tall birds. Definitely none of them had that problem going for them. So, with all that in mind, I'm going to argue that we were doing the same thing with our update order scenario. That all the code complexity, which was mirrored in the event storming, its poor testability, and all those bugs that resulted, plus our really ever loosening language that we were using, they were all heuristics, or again, modeling smells that were trying to tell us that update orders was the implementation detail masquerading as a problem statement, telling us that we've been busy focusing on the wrong problem and really we've been fighting our own futile little Emu War. Now, again, if we think of those bugs, the store manager never wanted like an arbitrary, a sort of random update to an order. They didn't want it to have just changed. They didn't achieve anything on its own. When the store manager was removing products, it was to ensure that shoppers only receive and pay for items that they really want. And when they were adding items during an order update, it was to allow shoppers to easily receive extra items that they had forgotten. And finally, when the store manager was removing all of those items from an order, that was to give shoppers an easy way to back out of an order. And you'll notice that nowhere in these problem statements, these much better, more precise problem statements, are we using the horrible word update. So a key takeaway here is do not put implementation details in your problem statements. So at worst, they will become self-fulfilling prophecies, as it did here, and at best, they will massively restrict your creativity when approaching the problem. So let's delete that horrible update order API. I never liked it anyway, and let's start afresh. So if we take each problem in isolation, let's start with allow shoppers to easily receive the extra items that they forgot. Without update order in the definition, there's probably a ton of ways for us to solve this problem. The shopper would probably be completely happy with the store manager instantly turning up at their front door with the forgotten items in one hand and a card reader in the other. I know that would definitely suit me every time I forget to buy something. That'd be wonderful. However, the store manager probably has better things to do and would prefer that we threw code at this problem. So for that, we can imagine something like a brand new place supplementary order endpoint. And I know that is wordy, sounds a bit odd, but I'm sure that every one of you can already guess what its signature is going to be. It's going to take a reference to the original order, a list of the items and quantities that were missed, and it's going to give us back a new order that's awaiting payment and either has details cloned or maybe it references the old order. Terribly uncatchy name, but very straightforward in what it does. And before even writing any code, we can sense check this by sort of plating it against our existing events. So supplementary order placed. And the nice thing about this one is regardless of where we put it, it merely spawns a new swim lane of events, which carry on in isolation, just like any other order, because in every practical sense, it is another order. And what we've avoided here are events that contradict or undermine other events that came before it. And we can already tell that that means fewer calls out to other microservices, far fewer branches in our code, as it can be more ignorant and decoupled from the wider system, which will also make it much easier to review and to test. Now, that is just one possible potential solution to that problem. There may well be better ones out there. There certainly could be. But for the sake of time, we're going to say that one's good enough. And with that, we're going to take a look at these other two. So how on earth can we solve these ones? Surely there is no way of solving these problems without running into those same fighting events that we had before, all those rewrites of history. Well, for this one, has anyone noticed this before on Uber Eats? So I have placed my order here for some delicious sushi, which is definitely making me hungry thinking about it. But it's going to auto-confirm in about 10 seconds. But I can also back out of this if I want to. I can back out of this delicious sushi, make amends, or pick something else. Or how about this one? You go to write an email, you press send, and then you're given the opportunity to undo sending the email. Like, how do you undo sending an email? Is it going to go and delete it from the recipient's inbox before they get a chance to read it? I mean, obviously not. What is happening in both of these cases is that the system is telling me, the client, that they've happened. But it's only after a certain amount of time that's passed do other services or the other systems, the rest of the world, only then do they get to find out that this event has happened. So maybe we can use this same technique here for these two problems. So luckily for us in e-commerce, buyer's remorse kicks in really, really quick. Often it's the instant after we click on checkout that we realize we didn't really need two of the same t-shirt. Or maybe you didn't have your glasses on when you were ordering your new jar of Vegemite, and then you found your glasses in time for the order confirmation and got a nasty surprise. I mean, I'm sure that horror kicks in pretty fast for a proper Australian. I love Marmite, but I'm sure it's a real problem if you're Australian. But whatever the cause of that buyer's remorse, it's fast enough that we can really take advantage of it here. So thinking back to our bugs, things went wrong when we took payments or shipped orders based on out-of-date information. That's what was always biting us. And if we trace back those processes and those events, we'll eventually hit order submitted. So it looks like that's the guy that we would probably like to keep quiet, at least for a little bit. And we can imagine doing that if we think about the same way that the Uber Eats and email client does. We'll just make room for a new order received event and maybe a back out period expired event. So a typical order will progress along all of these events as normal. But should a shopper want to back out entirely, or maybe they just want to turn their order back into a basket, there is now this safe little window in which they can do so. And if we contrast this to what we had before with update order, that order updated event had a large blast radius that could contradict and get in the way of lots of our other very key events, leading to a lot of complexity and more than a few bugs. But with this new solution, we have a much smaller blast radius that doesn't really seem to undermine anything, because the events that would have followed on simply never happen. And again, this may not be a perfect solution. There could be better ones out there. Really, we are just engineers speculating. We want to get into the room with our domain experts, with that store manager, and just make sure that we're making the right fit for the business, hash all these solutions out properly. But again, because I don't want to take your whole evening, we're going to say these are good enough for us. So for argument's sake, we're going to run with those and say we've got a little tick on those problems as well. So in doing so, our complex and buggy update order code base and endpoint has been replaced. We now have a very simple place supplementary order endpoint, and that one alone is meeting that goal of allow shoppers to easily receive extra items that they forgot. Plus, there was a small change to our submit order logic where we introduced that order received, order submitted split. And that, along with a little cancel order endpoint and maybe a tiny back out cron job, those three come together to satisfy the goals of give shoppers an easy way to back out of an order because they can cancel and leave it there, and ensure shoppers only receive and pay for the items they really want, because once they've cancelled, it's back to being a basket, add, remove, whatever items you want to your heart's content. And even without diving into the code, it's fair to say that each of these processes is far more single purpose and far less complex than what we had before. And if we revisit our old truism of complex problems require complex solutions, we can see that we are benefiting from the other side of this same coin. Simple problems only need simple solutions. And we were able to reach those simple solutions because domain-driven design helped us get around this guy. You can't remove complexity, you can only move it around. Because that is true-ish, but with our DDD hats on, we see that this little quote needs a few amendments and a pretty big asterisk. You cannot remove necessary complexity from your current level of abstraction, but go up a level of abstraction because maybe you can remove some of that complexity from up there. Now, again, I've come up with something horrifically uncatchy, but I do believe it gives us a decent summary of what we achieved in our e-commerce example. But hey, maybe a visualization will do a better job. So we've got levels of abstraction up the side and time running left to right at the bottom there. And you can imagine that we started with our pre-update order mental model of the system, and let's call that V1. And the problem statement came along, the store manager needs to update orders, and that basically instantly spawned a V2 of the mental model because it was both problem and solution in one word, update orders. And because of that, we went straight down to code and we built out our complex update order endpoint with all those edge cases that we later had to fix. But not liking that, with a bit of extra thought, a little bit of event storming and following some of those domain-driven design practices, we came up with a new mental model. So V3 here is where we split that one vague problem of update order into those three far more business-specific, goal-orientated problem statements. And in doing that, when we came back to code level, we could solve for those more specific problems with far less code and far less complexity than where we started. So you can actually remove complexity. And this has got to be one of the favorite possibilities that was opened up to me as I started to learn a bit of domain-driven design. Often when our solution space is more closely aligned to the problem space, a whole bunch of complexity does not need solving for. You've removed a whole bunch of accidental complexity. It simply evaporates. Now, it all sounds wonderful, but I'm sure the battle-hardened engineers in the audience will be thinking that is all lovely in theory, but back in the real world, what I've presented here would be a breaking change for our e-commerce system and those APIs we looked at. Because if we've already got our store manager coupled to that update order endpoint, we've got to ask them to stop using that now. And we've got to get everyone to use our new cancel order and place supplementary order endpoints instead. And breaking changes are painful and they are scary. And there's a very real temptation when we're faced with them simply not to do them, because we could stick with what we already had, with update order. Because yes, it is very hard to test and extend and to train people on and to understand ourselves, but it already exists. And it sort of works now we've dealt with so many edge cases. But when facing this kind of conundrum, we have to remember that the clients do not care about implementation details. They do not care about our code. When inspiration comes to them for a new problem that they wish we could solve for them, it's definitely not going to come through the lens of the solution space. They're not going to come with that problem with an understanding of all your wonderful code. They're not going to be shaped by our implementation. Instead, these problems are going to come through the lens of the problem space. What behaviors they wish were different, or what ones they wish they could have, or maybe what behaviors they think competitors could give them. So if our current solution is poorly aligned to the business problem now, it's only going to get far worse as new features roll in and we stretch a vague, poorly aligned endpoint and workflow to take on more and more responsibilities. And again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily bad code. This could be A-grade, world-class, fantastic code, but it's code that is having to deal with a hell of a lot of accidental complexity here. And unfortunately, no amount of wonderful code will make up for crappy API design. That is your interface with the real world. If that is porous, if that is prone to embodying errors, well, I'm afraid your code is going to have to be limited by that very low bar. So yes, breaking changes are not fun, but it is much better to treat the causes of a problem when you can, rather than endlessly treat the symptoms. So how on earth do I wrap all this up? Well, unless your domain is either e-commerce or the early 1900s Australian job market, which I'm going to guess probably none of you are in, Well, even if you were, the technical and modeling solutions I've talked about in here will probably be of little direct value. However, what I do hope you might take away from this is a way to prevent your superpower of near infinite code from becoming a bit of a curse. And the next time you find either yourself or maybe a colleague 6 classes deep in a problem which is full of complexity and maybe a few bugs or a few more than you would like, rather than crushing that problem in an avalanche of code, you'll recall this slightly silly talk. Maybe look up domain-driven design if you haven't already, do a bit of event storming, check your ubiquitous language, maybe ask the business why a good few times to make sure you're not solving the wrong problem in the first place. And definitely make sure that you're not accidentally fighting your own unmaintainable and inextensible Emu War. Thank you very much. That is all I've got for you. As I mentioned earlier, my partner did most of the illustrations. So if you like those and would like anything more, please follow those links there. And thank you all very much for listening.
Wow, thank you very much, Lee. That's an amazing presentation. I love the illustrations and the message delivered underneath it as well, or through it.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I also feel for that emu in that picture. Well, if there's no questions, hopefully that means it was a tight talk.
Oh, no, here we go.
Do you feel that there is an overlap with DDD between engineering and the UX team? I mean, definitely. Because again, you kind of hope that the UX team is doing a good job of finding out what the true problem is that we're meant to be solving for. So in many ways, I hope that, UX are sort of can be ambassadors or, can be ones really trying to empathize properly with clients and get in there and help us with this. And normally I do find that they do a great job, but what happens often is UX and UX researchers, when that gets translated to us engineers, we can sometimes lose focus on the business problem, and we can just already start seeing databases, and we'll start to go just to the code and schemas, and we'll forget what we were actually trying to solve. So normally I find UX are pretty good at this. I normally find it's ourselves as engineers, we need to get stuck in there a bit more with UX and truly get on board with the real problems that we should be solving, and not just making a CRUD app for them and hoping for the best.
Do you have any resources, Lee, that you'd recommend for people who want to read more?
Well, there is DDD Australia meetup group that's also wonderful. There are plenty of books out there. There is domain-driven design distilled, which is nice. If you're more of a functional mindset, there is also a book called Domain-Driven Design Made Functional. I quite like that one just because, to be honest, it makes it seem even simpler to me. Maybe that's just my mindset, but I can recommend that. I believe there is also virtualddd.com, if I can remember correctly. I think that's an online group that you can join. Lots of resources there. Yes, virtualddd.com. Lots of good people there, lots of resources there that I would definitely recommend.
That sounds good. Any more questions, anyone? Or shall we go to the questions for the audience, which are tricky for today? Let's see, 1 second more. If I was an artist, I could pose you some question as a drawing or an illustration, but unfortunately I'm not. So there just have to be simple ones. So everyone ready for the first question for a JetBrains license? This one's pretty easy, right? So I think someone should be able to answer it quite quickly. So who won the Emu Wars? Francis doesn't need a license. All right, Scott, do you need a JetBrains license? Because I think, despite the capitalization, that's a winning answer. So yeah, Scott Devs, very good. So if you just send me a message with your email address, I'll send you through the license. So yeah, just drop me a meetup message or email if I've emailed you already. So I know your email address. All right. And for the second license, please give me one of the main takeaways from Lee's talk. Francis is ever fighting not to get a license. All right, let's scope that to a takeaway that a technical takeaway rather than a 1900s fighting one. Let's see. That Andrew's got do not create unnecessary complexity. Talk to a stakeholder. That seems pretty reasonable. Talk to the emus. Thanks, Francis. Andrew, do you want another license, or is there anyone else who wants to put up a takeaway if Andrew doesn't want a license? Yeah, you might as well just try another license for one of their other products. Maybe see if the AI works well these days, or yeah, the data group was the SQL one. I can't remember.
I don't think the licensing, I don't think it covers the AI products, right?
The which one?
The license that we give away, I don't think it covers the AI product that they have.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. That would be my guess, but maybe you could just double check.
All right. Well, in this case, I think we'll give Andrew the license and Scott Devers. So yeah, send me a email or a meetup message to remind me to send you the license. And this talk will be available online on Twitch for like a week, and I'll move it across to the ANZ Coders YouTube channel. Is that all right, Lee? You happy to have it published?
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, I'll send you the link as well, so you can use it for whatever, whenever you need it. All right, so thank you very much, everyone. And also, if anyone does have any topics that they want to propose or anything they want to talk about, then please get in touch. I think, how far out, Francis, have we got speakers for?
I think we have maybe got two more, maybe one more, one or two more, maybe one. And then
Yeah, so in that case,
and
we
then,
are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're fairly booked out. So and then I'm hoping maybe for the December one, maybe we can do a in-person meetup at a pub or something.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
next month is looking like an in-person one again. So stay tuned for the details.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably Mantle Group, right, Francis?
Hopefully, yeah. It's just just to let you guys in on the little conundrum. the person that's speaking next month is also like our contact for the mentor group, but he's kind of resigned from the mentor group, so it's kind of all up in the air a little bit. But my understanding is the mentor group should be still okay. But yeah, I just need to get some confirmation from.
Yeah, so we'll let you know anyway in good time to plan whether you need to just sit in front of the computer or whether you can head into the city. And yeah, another big thank you to Lee. I mean, that's pretty much the coolest illustrated talk, and I mean, such a great story. So very impressed. And I think, as people review it in their mind, the meaning will be coming through as well as the illustrations, and help them in their day-to-day work, fighting race conditions, and keeping in mind that really maybe you don't need to do this complex thing at all. You can do something else instead.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you all next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for turning up and enjoying the talk. Yeah.
No.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Cool.